Lesson 1. Introduction to Life Science as a Way of Life. 1.1. What is life science? 1.2. An Introduction to Life Science. 1.3. An inquiry into the philosophy, principles, and practices of life science. 1.4. Discussion of the medical approach to health and disease. 1.5. What health really is. Welcome. It is my privilege to introduce to you the science of health, known by the descriptive term life science. It is also known as health science, natural hygiene, and other terms. What is life science? At the outset, it is wise to delineate just what life science is, just what grounds it covers. Life as we know it is possible and became possible because certain favorable conditions are and were present. Some of these conditions include favorable temperature, presence of oxygen and other gases and minerals, presence of water, absence of lethal substances, etc. Life science is the study of all the conditions which make life possible. Because present-day life seems to be losing touch with those conditions which made life possible, life science brings us back to our roots, so to speak. We should endeavor to meet life's requisites so that we can lead a joyous existence. Science is not the cold, dispassionate pursuit many of us have been led to believe. Rather, it is personal and relevant to all that we are involved in. When we turn our studies upon ourselves so that we may have a very personal science, we begin to arrive at the essence of life science. Science as represented today is not the warm, practical medium we speak of here. Science that we can't use and benefit by is hardly science. Life science is the exploration and elaboration of those elements and influences we can invoke to exalt our lives and being. Certain truths are applicable to our being. Studying and systemizing those truths so that we can be guided by them is our aim here. That which begets correct results is scientific. That which begets wrong results is unscientific. Life science concerns itself with those principles and truths applicable to human life so that we may observe and avail ourselves of them. We are of the firm conviction that only by scientific living can we realize the loftiest joys and the destiny which is our birthright. Animals in nature are creatures of instinct. Following the guidance of instinct, they are correctly self-directed to meet their needs. Thus they thrive optimally in accord with their environmental possibilities. Inborn guidance is, in effect, life science or a science of life for nature's creatures. Humans have infinitely more potential for happiness and goodness than nature's simpler forms of life. We are endowed with immeasurably more sophisticated faculties. These superior endowments can keep us in a state of euphoria during a long life. Life science must be for humans what inborn direction is for animals. We, too, have instincts, but we are far more than just basic impulses of life. Unfortunately, we not only fail to follow our instincts, but we often reject them in our living practices. Our instincts have been vitiated and perverted by unwholesome conditioning in a world that is quite berserk by sane standards. When humans act contrary to instincts, they are being unscientific. When their practice are in accord with their instincts, With their inherent biological adaptations, they are living scientifically. Life science is as simple as that. Obeying our natural instincts is part and parcel of life science. We believe nature did not err in instilling in us instincts. We contend that humans, with our as yet fledgling intellects, do the erring and begets our sickness and suffering. Life science is an intellectual endeavor. We are far enough along that we can determine what is good and what is bad for us. We are profound enough in our knowledge to construct a science of life that will guide us to realize the happiness and the destiny that should be ours. Life science is, therefore, a way of life that rightfully concerns itself with every facet of human life and human well-being. Only such a thoroughgoing philosophy and concern can be a true science of life. The following sections: 1.2, An Introduction to Life Science. 1.2.1, Life Science as a Philosophy of Life. 1.2.2, Life Science Philosophy, Principles, and Practices. In introducing life science as a true philosophy of life thoroughly in accord with the facts of existence, the question arises as to how its validity was determined. The surest way of assessing the correctness of any system is to put it to the test. Does it work? If it works, it must be deemed valid. If it does not work, then it must be unscientific. Life science began with success. From its beginning as a new but not yet complete healing science, it developed until today. It is a full-blown scientific system touching upon everything that relates to human well-being. That it is valid is beyond doubt. Life science works perfectly. To capture the essence of the science of healthful living, I feel it appropriate to quote from a most notable hygienist, Dr. Keki Sidwa. He's been a hygienic practitioner in Great Britain for almost 20 years. In spite of all the great advances in many branches of science, we are still in a period of prehistory, a dark age, in thinking about health, disease, and healing. What the world sorely needs is a new concept of health, a different orientation of thoughts, words, and deeds that we have been led to accept for umpteen generations is now urgently called for. Natural hygiene, a life science, is the branch of biology that investigates the conditions upon which health depends and the means by which it may be sustained in all its virtue and purity, while we have it, and restored when it has been lost or impaired. Before psychology developed, the rules of hygiene were instinctive, traditional, and empirical. Today, these rules are based on the growing knowledge of physiology and biology. If we had perfect knowledge of the laws of life and applied them in a perfect system of hygiene, disease would be impossible and never occur. In this sense, hygiene is the science of intelligent and healthful living. Natural hygiene refutes the present-day ideas that disease and ill health are inevitable in people's lives, depending on chance and circumstances outside their own control and domain. Natural hygiene is a way of life, a philosophy of living. Health can only be obtained through healthful living. It cannot be bought across the counter of a drugstore, nor can it be found in a physician's office or in a hospital. We contend that healing is a biological process which is continuously going on inside every organism. This brilliant expression of the hygienic stand by Dr. Sidwa deserves immortality. His salutary contributions to the science of healthful living will achieve immortality in our annals. Certainly, the statement embodies the essence of hygienic philosophy. The following is a concise statement of the philosophy, principles, and practices of life science. 1.2.2 Life Science, Philosophy, Principles, and Practices. Life science holds that life should be meaningful and filled with beauty, goodness, and happiness. Life science holds that humans are inherently good, righteous, and virtuous, and that their exalted character will be realized under ideal life conditions. Life science holds that superlative well-being is normal to human existence and necessary to the realization of the highest human ideals. Life science holds that supreme human excellence can be realized only in those who embrace those precepts and practices which are productive of well-being. Life science, which encompasses all that bears upon human well-being, constitutes the only way to realize the highest possible order of human existence. Life science alone is in harmony with nature, in accord with the principles of vital organic existence, correct in science, sound in philosophy and ethics, in agreement with common sense, and successful in practice, and a blessing to humankind. Life science recognizes that the human body is a fully self-sufficient organism that is self-directing, self-constructing, self-preserving, and self-healing, and that it is capable of maintaining itself in superb functioning order, completely free of disease, if its needs are met. Foremost among these needs are fresh air, pure water, rest, and sleep, wholesome foods, cleanliness, comfortable temperature, sunshine, exercise, constructive work, emotional poise, self-mastery, recreation, and pleasant environment. Life science recognizes that humans are constitutionally adapted to a diet of fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds, eaten in compatible combinations while in the fresh, raw, natural state. Life science recognizes that diseases are caused by improper life practices, especially dietary indiscretions. Illness proceeds from reduced nerve energy and consequent toxemia. Insufficient nerve energy arises from dissipation, stress, overindulgence, excess or deficiency of the normal essentials of life, or pollution of the body with substances not normal to it. Accordingly, recovery from sickness can be achieved only by discontinuing its causes and supplying conditions favorable to healing. Life science recognizes that a thoroughgoing rest, which includes fasting, is the most favorable condition under which an ailing body can purify and repair itself. Life science, which teaches that exalted well-being can be attained and maintained only through biologically correct living practices, is not in any sense a healing art or a curing cult. It regards as mistaken and productive of much grief the idea that diseases can be prevented or overcome by agencies abnormal to our natural being. Consequently, life science emphatically rejects all drugs, medications, vaccinations, and treatments because they undermine health by interfering with or destroying vital body processes and tissues. Therefore, life science regards the body and mind as the inviolable sanctuary of an individual's being. Life science holds that everyone has an inalienable right to have a pure and uncontaminated body, to be free of abnormal compulsions and restraints, and to be free to meet his or her needs as a responsible member of society. Sections 1.3, An Inquiry into the Philosophy, Principles, and Practices of Life Science. 1.3.1, The Concept of Innate Individual Worth. 1.3.2, The Concept of Happiness and Ideal Health as Normal. 1.3.3, The Self-Evident Concept of Self-Government in All Organisms. 1.3.4, Life Science as a New Concept of Healthful Living. 1.3.5, Life Science as a Broad-Based Science of Life. 1.3.6, The Concept of Self-Healing and Self-Repair. 1.3.7, The Concept of Individual Sovereignty. Life science holds that we are born naturally innocent and naturally good. The first two paragraphs of the concise statement we heretofore printed in Exposition of Life Sciences Philosophy, Principles, and Practices state this. Scientific studies of babies and youngsters have pointed to one inescapable conclusion. As gregarious creatures, humans are naturally empathetic, altruistic, and moral, i.e., humans are naturally righteous toward one another in keeping with their gregarious instinct. Humans are woefully perverted by unnatural conditions within the context of civilization. They are made vicious by inhumane influences such as deceptive practices, exploitation, insecurity, and other baneful conditions in a society gone mad. Individuals usually strive to present the appearance of upright character to others. This bespeaks our innate urge and conviction that we should be righteous. Life science holds that if a society of assurance exists, these innate virtues will assert themselves naturally. 1.3.2, The Concept of Happiness and Ideal Health as Normal. Life science holds that life was developed to be a long, joyous event from birth until a natural death. Happiness and health flow from the ideal life conditions. Ideal life conditions are normal in the environments of our development. However, such is the human intelligence that it has made almost all environments over the face of the globe inhabitable. Many arts, artifices, and artificial environments have been created to satisfactorily supplant the wonders, beauties, and beneficence of the natural environment in many habitats, though, in truth, such artifices are never completely wholesome substitutes. Life science holds that humans developed to their high state because they adapted so well to the environment and its possibilities. This means that health is normal and natural when the conditions to which we are adapted are met. Superb excellence in humans flows from ideal life conditions and the superlative health begotten of them. 1.3.3, The Self-Evident Concept of Self-Government in All Organisms. Simple observation of the development of complex organisms from the union of sperm and ovum is indicative that the power of life resides within. Without anything from the outside other than needed raw materials, the organism has the inner direction to fashion itself from a fertilized ovum into a mature adult. This implies an inherent character that embraces the following capabilities. Organisms are self-programmed. Organisms are self-directing and self-governing. Organisms are self-sufficient when their material requisites are available. Organisms are self-constructing in accordance with their genetic blueprint. Organisms are self-defensive and preservative, defending themselves against all internal and external threats. Organisms are self-repairing or self-healing and possess solely and exclusively the facilities and powers to accomplish restoration in event of damage or derangement. These facilities and powers are self-evident upon the simplest observation of yourself or other organisms. This concept and its axioms should ever be borne in mind when dealing with clients. The confidence needed in dealing with your own problems, should you have any, or with the problems of your clients, can be derived and reinforced by referring to these self-evident truths. 1.3.4 Life Science as a New Concept of Healthful Living. Life science may be said to be a reassertion of the conditions best suited to human life. In pristine nature, humans lived what is now called life science because of primal urges. On the instinctual level, they lived as gatherers of fruits from vine, stalk, and tree. With the development of intellect, humans became ever more versatile in dealing with the forces of nature, but this eventually led to human alienation from both nature and our biological heritage. Though most humans observed much of their pristine endowment well into the civilization of the Christian era, the dark ages of medieval times brought on the renunciation of nature and earthly considerations. Humans became poorer in the observation of the elementary needs of life. Human needs on earth were contravened in the name of religion and salvation. Fortunately, the Dark Ages did not wipe out mankind. Near the end of the Dark Ages, the unnatural and inhumane conditions under which European civilization lived decimated the population with plagues. Great plagues were not due to any kind of contagion. The only thing contagious in the times of the bubonic and black plagues was widespread modes of death-dealing living practices. Hygiene or life science as a philosophy and outlook survived the Dark Ages when the twin human scourges of medical and religious superstition saddled most of what we refer to smugly as the civilized world. In many parts of the world, our biological mandate was fairly well maintained, notably in tropical cultures of the Far East and in isolated pockets here and there. It was preserved among many traditions and cultures in part. Well before the Christian era, Pythagoras elaborated a rather extensive philosophy on living, on all planes of life. Among them was perhaps the best formulated statement of hygienic living until this time. While the Greeks, of whom Pythagoras was one, were heavy on fruitarianism, they were also heavy into incipient practices that begot the modern Goliath of medicine. The philosophy of Pythagoras gave rise to Apollonius and the Essenes, an aesthetic culture that was vegetarian, fruitarian in practice. Much of Essenian philosophy and practices were preserved in the New Testament and is quoted in the sayings of Christ. The thin thread of hygienic philosophy survived and received a modern impetus from the greatest universal genius of all times, Leonardo da Vinci, who was a vegetarian fruitarian. Though medical beliefs remain relatively unscathed, while the areas of religious domination were receding during the Renaissance, some elements of the hygienic philosophy survived. I reiterate that our natural heritage was largely unaffected by the medical outlook in many areas of the world, notably in the Far East, but healthful living as a philosophy of life in the Western culture did not exist as such. It was not until the time of Dr. Isaac Jennings in 1822 that hygiene as a formalized philosophy of life had its beginnings. Not until the consummate genius of Doctors Graham, Traill, Dewey, Tilden, and Shelton did the philosophy and science of health become fully ascertained. Life science is not new from many perspectives, although it is relatively new to what we call civilization, but it is totally new for most who learn it the first time. Now it is alien to our culture because of its relative rarity. At this time, life science, even though in accord with our pristine being, is in eclipse because of medical thinking and a commerce that trades upon pathogenic fare. It is our hope to teach enough dedicated individuals this science of health to assure that humanity thrives in health and enlightenment. In pursuing this course, we are asked to be torchbearers of a way of life whose time has come. 1.3.5 Life Science as a broad-based science of life. By no means is life science confined to dietary principles, as you might gather from association with today's hygienists. Few hygienists involve themselves with the expansive aspects of life science as a philosophy, embracing every facet of human well-being. Dietary concerns are but one area of life science's dominion. It also includes mental and emotional well-being, as well as social and economic well-being. It includes environmental factors or ecology and is coexistive with all factors that touch upon human welfare. While this, of course, is nominally on the specific area of nutrition, nutrition is but a small part of the all-encompassing philosophy of life science. 1.3.6 The concept of self-healing or self-repair. Self-healing is the only healing. Throughout nature, we see animals with cuts, bruises, broken bones, and other injuries undergo healing. Obviously, this healing is affected by internal faculties and powers, for in nature, animals seek out a quiet, secluded spot and rest. They undergo almost no activity and partake of no food. Instinctively, an injured animal will abstain from all indulgences that detract from the full application of the body's energies and faculties to the reparative and restorative process. Likewise, humans, when placed under the same conditions in keeping with our nature and disposition, undergo healing in a fraction of the time that occurs when regular activities are pursued. Healing is always and ever a biological process. Our task is but to establish the conditions so that the body may conduct the process more quickly and efficiently. The inherent programming, intelligence, and power that develop the fertilized ovum into a wonderfully and beautifully built creature is all the healing power that is needed. Conditions favorable to the exercise of these powers can be established. As a health practitioner and nutritionist, it will be your role to know and apply these conditions. Much suffering and grief result from the idea that the body can be helped by the application of substances, conditions, and treatments abnormal to the body. It will be your role to rescue the victims from harmful practices as well as set them on the right course for health recovery and maintenance. 1.3.7 The concept of individual sovereignty. Life science holds that everyone is an independent entity unto himself or herself within the context of society. Everyone should be entirely free, fettered in no way, within the context of enlightened self-interest, within the context of our symbiotic mandate on Earth. Every man, woman, and child must be regarded as capable of carrying on life's affairs for himself or herself. It is not our role to judge or impose ourselves on others, but to help if our aid is sought. We should not impose ourselves on anyone, no matter how wise or unwise, or how good or bad such imposition is or would be. We must accord to everyone the prerogative of leading their lives as is their bent and capability, so long as their pursuits do not impinge upon the birthright of others. The golden rule should be our rule of conduct. While it may seem unwise to grant the same privileges and prerogatives to both the genius and the relatively unlettered, nevertheless, a society is not free in which either are denied their right to pursue opportunities on an equal footing. The capable are bound to succeed and should offer aid to the biologically crippled or less favored brethren. For all its drawbacks and advantages, we must always respect everyone as supremely sovereign. Whatever they do or decide, however good or bad their acts or decisions, in their own interests, we must pursue a role of non-interference. We may, by example, seek to inspire and motivate, but to impose ourselves and our precepts on others is reprehensible. 1.4. Discussion of the medical approach to health and disease. 1.4.1. The erroneous notion of cure. 1.4.2. Cures do not deal with causes. 1.4.3. Cures do not furnish the needs of life. 1.4.4. Cures destroy body vitality. 1.4.5. Medical and healing art approaches are deadly and dead-end. 1.4.1. The erroneous notion of cure. The idea behind medicine is more than 2,500 years old, and like most ideas from behind the Dark Ages, it's very unscientific. The premise is that the body is like a machine that can be repaired by outside agencies. The machine goes wrong because of invading entities. In ancient times, these entities were evil spirits, demons, and devils, which had to be exorcised. By and by, these evil spirits became known as little beasties, called microbes, germs, bacteria, viruses, and yet other appellations. Medicine today has the concept of cure, a word that has been perverted from the original of care. Medicine itself means a curative or healing substance. The idea behind the use of medicine is that the medicine acts with the organism, that it seeks out the trouble, routs the invaders, and affects in some manner the necessary healing. The medical concept of the modus operandi of drugs, which they call medicines, is very hazy at best. But medicine is the harmful practices that men do to try to help ailing people. People go to physicians for medical intervention. They want to get fixed up. They're ailing. Something must be done lest they suffer grave consequences or death. Medical practitioners take advantage of the clients. They play upon their fears. They applaud their clients for coming to them when they did. They flatter them for this bit of wisdom and assure them that if they do not do something soon, grave dangers will ensue. The medical man always has a course of treatment to suggest, invariably a prescription of drugs and tests. The idea is that the tests will reveal what is wrong and thereby determine what drugs to prescribe or what steps to take, as in surgery. That their beliefs and practices are, on the whole, precisely contrary to biological science seems never to enter their minds. We'll treat medical concepts in depth at a later time, but here, suffice it to say, there is no healing other than self-healing. All modalities can interfere with healing, but none can aid healing. 1.4.2 Cures do not deal with causes. Can you imagine trying to develop a drug to cure drunkenness without going to the root of the whole matter, i.e., the drunkard's drinking habit? How can we deal with drunkenness if the drunkard continues to drink? This is what happens with the medical approach. They try to remedy effects or symptoms without dealing with causes. In reality, they drug, butcher, and purge while almost totally ignoring basic causes of physiological problems. They resort to crippling surgery and treatments running into the thousands of dollars, when the problems can be simply and inexpensively solved by a change in life practices. You'll learn herein that nothing happens without sufficient cause. You'll learn that all afflictions of the body must be caused, and the cause is almost always initiated by the sufferer. You'll learn that unless cause is discontinued, the problem will always develop again, ever more serious. In learning nutritional and health science, you're basically learning to do two things. 1, to remove causes of problems, and 2, to establish the conditions of health. Since these two steps are so very easy overall, that is one reason we can confidently bestow upon you a degree of Doctor of Philosophy at the end of the lessons. If you've mastered the understanding of cause and effect in nutrition and health, that diseases are suffered because the sufferer has indulged or been subject to cause, and that health results when reasons for health are dominant, you'll be a mountain among a throng of molehills called healthcare professionals. 1.4.3 Cures do not furnish the needs of life. To be returned to health, the body must be provided with its requirements. First, those substances, influences, and practices which beget illness and disease must be discontinued. Secondly, it is necessary to bring to the client the essentials of health. Very simply, these are pure air, pure water, correct diet, sunshine, exercise or wholesome activity, adequate rest and sleep, emotional poise, security of life and its means, and yet other factor elements and influences. If you reflect upon medical procedures, it is obvious they do not try to ascertain causes that are inherent in lifestyle and practices. They do what an auto mechanic does. They try to find out which cylinder is missing, and then proceed as if the body can be repaired, much in the manner of a vehicle. They rarely advise about practices and beliefs which cause problems. Since most medical men are financially oriented, it is wise that they do not teach correct habits. They'd be out of business if their clients became well. 1.4.4 Cures destroy body vitality. Dr. Herbert M. Shelton must be proclaimed the greatest oracle of hygiene philosophy, principles, and practices unto this day. He has noted that now we have more medical discoveries than ever before. We have more medical practitioners than ever before. Medical men enjoy more respect than ever before, at least until recent years. And yet, for all this, we also have more disease and suffering than ever before. Why is this so? Because very simply, drugs destroy. They never build. It is not within the province of drugs to create cells and replace body tissue. Medical men will be the first to tell you this, for they've studied physiology too. but yet they act as if their drugs perform some kind of magic that will affect healing. What do drugs, when administered, really do? In truth, drugs do nothing other than form chemical unions with body compounds and fluids. When these chemical unions occur, the body suffers distress. When the character of a substance is determined as harmful to the body, it goes into a frenzy. When it does this, it is stimulated. Sometimes the body has a reaction of depression, in which case it is sedated or narcotized. This means function has been inhibited or paralyzed. In both cases, the reaction is one of self-protection against an unwelcome intruder, in this case a poison, even though it is called a medicine. In causing an emergency in the body, drugs are harmful. The body must redirect its energies from the healing process which it is conducting. The symptoms for which the drugs or medicines are administered are evidences of the body's self-conducted healing process. When drugs are ingested or injected, the body must leave off partially or wholly the cleansing and healing efforts and attend to a greater threat which the drugs represent. When healing efforts are discontinued, the symptoms disappear. Physicians interpret the disappearance of symptoms as a cure or a healing condition. They thus mistake drug or poison effects for healing effects. In reality, the body has more problems than before, for it now has, additional to its prior problems, the problem of expelling a terrible poison too. 1.4.5 Medical and healing art approaches are deadly and dead-end. We readily recognize that drug addicts take illicit drugs and eventually become physiological wrecks as a result. Also, the drug addict loses moral values. Thinking ability is lessened and almost totally redirected to acquiring the addictive drug and to the spell the body casts when they are taken. What we also recognize is that physician-prescribed drugs have precisely the same actions. What we do not recognize is that the prescriptions, administrations, and treatments of all so-called healers have the very same effects, whether the medics be called physicians, homeopaths, chiropractors, osteopaths, herbal doctors, acupuncturists, or whatever. Their modalities devitalize, while their ignorance of cause likewise continues to devitalize and destroy. Because treatments are more or less deadly, and because causes are left intact by those who treat the diseased, the situation gets progressively worse. Those who get better do not become so because of the treatments. Better health comes from self-healing, which occurs despite, not because of, treatments. Under medical and other care, recovery takes place about 90% of the time. Medical men, just as do herbalists, chiropractors, osteopaths, etc., attribute healing to their intervention. But the unrecognized truth is that witch doctors have a much higher cure rate, and that hygienic practitioners have a nearly 100% recovery rate. As a hygienic practitioner or health professional, following the dictates of a true health science, you'll realize a nearly 100% success rate. Healing always takes place to the extent of residual healing potential when causes are discontinued and the conditions of health instituted. 1.5 What health really is. 1.51 Delineation and description of health. 1.5.2 Beauty as reflecting health. 1.5.3 Fullness of function as a barometer of health. 1.5.4 the possibility of perfect health for humans. 1.5.5 Health is normal and natural. 1.5.6 How life science began in modern times. 1.5.1 Delineation and description of health. Can we define health? Yes, we can. Conventionally, a lack of obvious disease is regarded as a state of health. In actuality, about 99% of our peoples are diseased in some manner or other, regardless of appearances. Health may be defined as having fullness of function. Health means complete well-being, inner and outer harmony, vigor, strength, mental acuity, in short, total fitness. Perhaps no better statement of health has ever been made than that of Dr. Herbert M. Shelton. I am happy to quote his definition. Health is a condition of perfect development, a state of wholeness and harmonious development and growth, an adaptation of part to part of an organism, or organ to organ, with no part stunted and no part in excess. In this state of organic development lies the perfection and symmetry of beauty. Beauty is but the reflection of wholeness, of health. It is easy to demonstrate that the forms and proportions of humans and every animal and plant which are in the highest and most useful state are the most beautiful and therefore the most healthy. When every bone is of the best form and size for its service in the total organism, there is perfect proportion. When every muscle is fully and proportionally developed, with just enough of fat and cellular tissues to round out the muscles, we have the highest beauty of form. When the texture of the skin is finest, when the circulation of blood most vigorous, the blood well nourished and freed of all waste, there is the glow and charm of the finest complexion. The highest beauty is the expression of the highest health. Partial beauty, fading beauty, or decaying beauty, these are but exceptions of partial, fading, or decaying health. When we suffer any impairment or impediment, we cannot be said to be in a state of health. We can be in a relatively high state of health, but to the extent we do not enjoy perfection of body function, we are not healthy. We live in a nation where disease is the norm of life rather than a rarity. In taking up a health career, it is our duty to make health the norm and disease a relative rarity. I refer you to text material included in this lesson for a fuller discussion of what health is. Therein appear 2 articles by the Dean of Health Teachers, Dr. Herbert M. Shelton. 1.5.2 Beauty as reflecting health. Though our standards of beauty are rather low today, they still nevertheless take note of the exceptional beauty. Beauty as a reflection of health and well-being should be the norm, not the exception. How many women have we seen whom are so lovely and beautiful that we are drawn to them as a magnet? How many men are so wholesome, so fit and handsome that they, likewise, are irresistible to their female counterparts? I dare say such men and women constitute less than 1% of our peoples. The ability to appreciate beauty is highest in humans, and humans would normally be the epitome of beauty if they lived in keeping with their birthright, that is, their biological mandate. We readily recognize beauty in birds, flowers, and other life in nature, but our fellow humans, whether aged or young, whether nice or disagreeable, are, for the most part, in some way repulsive to our aesthetic senses. 40% of our population are repulsively overweight. This is but one impact of the ugliness that characterizes an unhealthy population. I've seen monsters transformed as if by magic upon undergoing as little as a month's hygienic care. Fatness and ugliness both were overcome with the restoration of a relatively high level of health. One of the miracles you can hold forth to your would-be clients is that of handsomeness or beauty. That quality will be tremendously enhanced in those whom you help to achieve a high level of health. 1.5.3 Fullness of function as a barometer of health. While it is not always true that athletes are superb examples of health, it is true that all in superb health are quite athletic. Suppleness, agility, stamina, strength, and vigor are qualities essential to a state of health. Physiological function will be ideal in every respect to someone in full health. A sense of euphoria or joy and of total well-being is a condition of health. Healthy people usually wear smiles and pleasant countenances. Glumness and a downcast disposition personify inner unhealthfulness. Nothing sabotages beauty, function, happiness, and well-being as a body shot through with the poisons or toxins born of bad living practices. 1.5.4 The possibility of perfect health for humans. Life science holds that perfect health is the norm of life. We hold that all creatures in nature adapted perfectly to the conditions of life under which they developed. They changed to cope with their environment and their food supplies. In nature, perfect health is the norm of existence. Animals have no knowledge or concept about healthful living. They live healthfully, naturally, by doing only what their instincts bid them to do. It would seem that with a technological society at the apex of development, human health would have kept pace and be better now than ever. The contrary is true. Humans are probably unhealthier now than at any time except the immediate past, that is, the last 10 to 20 centuries. In the Dark Ages and medieval times, health was at an overall low. Technological progress builds upon itself, and it is a credit to the human heritage that we still have, even though in a degenerated state, sufficient intelligence to develop and husband a highly technological society. Even though affected by physical degeneracy, the brain is always the least affected of organs in famine, disease, starvation, and physical debilitation. Perfect health is possible if the conditions of health are ideal. With our intelligence and extensive technology, we can create the conditions for healthful living practically anywhere in the world where humans live. 1.5.5 Health is normal and natural. Over eons of time, organisms have developed to cope with changed environmental conditions and food supplies that varied environments were capable of producing. Environments ranged from the ideal to the impossible for every creature on Earth, even microbial forms of life. Perfection arises from adaptation, from coping with conditions. Adjustments to every vagary of nature created organisms that functioned perfectly. In humans and animals, we witness what is obvious. Health is normal and natural. We see animals in nature being born, living their natural lifespans, and dying naturally without once suffering the infirmities of sickness. And for all our modern pathogenic practices, we see humans more or less well most of the time. In view of my hygienic experience and by my observation of hundreds of others who remain sickness-free under the hygienic regime, there is but one inescapable conclusion. Health is a normal condition of life. It is our birthright. Life science is truly a science of life, for it is based soundly and scientifically upon our biological requirements for thriving in perfect health. This is the outlook which you are studying in this course, and being asked to advocate and follow in your professional career. Let us now explore life sciences beginnings. 1.5.6 How life science began in modern times. Life science, or natural hygiene, had its awakening in 1822 when Dr. Isaac Jennings, who had a medical practice in Derby, Connecticut, despaired of drugging. In his many years of practice, he was distressed to see his patients become worse from the drugging modality. His patients died and mainly became chronically afflicted. His yearning to help his fellow beings was sincere. Dr. Jennings noted that as physicians became older, they drugged less and less. He did likewise and found his patients were faring better under less drugging. When he quit prescribing drugs altogether and found that it wrought miracles. When patients with problems came to Dr. Jennings, he would dispense pills of colored flour and vials of tinted water. He gave strict instructions for their use, just as other physicians gave detailed instructions for the ingestion of drugs. But in Dr. Jennings' case, he made a prescription that was to launch a great health movement and an infant science. In 1822, at age 34, Dr. Jennings gave his patients placebos with instructions to take them at specific hours of the day with a glass of water. His prescription was that no food could be taken or else the pills would not work. His patients were ordered to do this for a number of days and then return for a checkup. Upon return, they would be terminated from the regime or continued on it a few more days. Under Dr. Jennings' new modality, his patients invariably became well. While other physicians lost patients by the graveyardful, his thrived. The ailing flocked to him from far and near. The success of his no-drugging system astounded Dr. Jennings as much as it did his patients and colleagues. Wisely, in his initial years, Dr. Jennings did not reveal his secrets. Instead, he sought the rationale for his success. He called his treatments the leave-alone method, while professing to dispense pills of unnamed composition. They came to be regarded as pills with magic curative properties. From his rather inauspicious start, Dr. Jennings began to develop a few laws relative to his observations and experience. He called the system that flowed from the employment of these laws orthopathy, or correct affection. He formulated many of the laws of life and named some of them as follows. The laws of action and response, i.e., the necessity for activity and rest, sleep. The law of economy, which resulted from his observation of the way in which the body managed its vital energies. The law of physiological distribution, or the way in which the body supplies all its parts and faculties adequately. The law of stimulation, or how the body accelerates its physiological activities at a frenzied level when a toxic material is introduced therein. The law of accommodation, or how the body adjusts to poisons by decreasing its vital resistance and more effectively quarantining itself from the toxin's baneful influences. The body gradually builds defensive mechanisms, much as armies grow to ward off attack as the need becomes greater. The law of limitation, or the conservation of vital energies. The law of equilibrium, or the revitalization of debilitating parts and faculties when normalcy has been restored to an ailing organism. Dr. Jennings, to his credit, saw disease not as an attack from some malevolent entity, but as lowered vital energy or vital energy redirected to other purposes. His new outlook ventured that disease was caused by an ebb of the body's energy supply. In essence, he was correct, but his explanations were quite formative, for it remained for successors to build upon the foundations he built. Dr. Jennings may rightfully be ascribed as the father of natural hygiene or life science, for he is the first to attempt a systematic ascertainment of the physiology of health and disease. The next illustrious forefather of the science of health was Sylvester Graham. He was born 6 years after Dr. Jennings in 1794. He was a very sickly boy. Becoming healthy was an obsession with him, which led him to study health. He became well versed in anatomy and physiology. Before coming into the health scene, he was a Presbyterian preacher. In 1830, during the temperance movement, he lectured in Philadelphia on the physiological evils of alcohol. As a firebrand orator, he was amazingly effective with large audiences. In Philadelphia, he expanded his knowledge of physiology and health and became acquainted with the teachings of a vegetarian group who abstained from animal foods and products and many modern ways of preparing foods. The group was known as the Bible Christian Church and based its mode of life on biblical commands. In the great cholera epidemic of 1832, Sylvester Graham rose to fame. He literally took on the whole medical fraternity of New York City and the interests supporting the medical system. While the medical men were advising New Yorkers to abstain from fruit and to cook their food thoroughly, Dr. Graham was advocating eating more fruits in the raw state. He advocated open windows, more light, and fresh air and other healthful measures which were contrary to medical teachings. It is noteworthy that those who followed Dr. Graham's teachings were not affected by the cholera epidemic, whereas those who followed medical bidding died wholesale. His fame as a health lecturer was well established in 1832, and he, more than anyone else, gave health science a tremendous impetus. He was in demand as a lecturer over the whole eastern seaboard. He appeared before audiences of several thousand. People flocked to his lectures and listened to them raptly for hours in seeking salvation from disease and suffering. So effective was Dr. Sylvester Graham in his lectures and writings that books and magazines blossomed, presenting the Graham system. The first health food stores came into existence to sell foods which he advocated. Special eateries and living facilities were established for those who wanted to follow his system. The name of Graham became synonymous with the hygienic diet and hygienic living. Where Dr. Isaac Jennings approached health and healing from the point of view of helping people regain health, Dr. Sylvester Graham was instrumental in teaching the touchstones of healthful living so that people would not become ill in the first place. During the 1840s, Dr. Jennings and Dr. Graham were joined by perhaps one of the greatest geniuses the movement has produced, Dr. Russell Thacker Troll. His was an inquiring, methodical mind that ever sought the rationale and scientific basis for the concepts and findings developed by his predecessors. Thus he brought the hygienic system to a standard that could thoroughly challenge the medical system. Dr. Troll delivered a lecture in the Smithsonian Institute to some of the nation's highest dignitaries in 1863. The title of the lecture was The True Healing Art. It made quite a ripple during the time. Dr. Troll is the originator of the famous challenge, which, though oft repeated, has never been accepted by a single physician unto this day. This challenge is stated below. 1. That the medical system is entirely false. That it is untrue in philosophy, absurd in science, in opposition to natural principles, contrary to common sense, disastrous in results, and a curse to humanity. 2. That the hygienic system is true, that it is in harmony with nature, in accordance with the principles of vital organic existence, correct in science, sound in philosophy, in agreement with common sense, successful in results, and a blessing to mankind. The new system of health did not discriminate against women. In fact, it encouraged women to participate in the movement on an equal footing with men. Among the notable women in this new movement were such luminaries as Florence Nightingale, Mary Gove, Harriet Austin, Susanna May Dodds, Ellen White, guiding light of the Seventh-day Adventists, and Louisa May Alcott, the famous author whose brother became an MD and a hygienic professional. In the 1870s, the medical profession adopted the Pasteurian germ theory with a passion. People found it much easier to blame their problems on little mysterious beasties rather than on their mode of living. No matter what they did, they were absolved of responsibility for their condition. The germ theory made them unfortunate victims of malevolent entities over which they could exercise little control. With the ushering in of the germ era came about the decline of hygiene. While the philosophy remains alive and still receives a good following, it has been in continual decline relative to our population. In recent years, there has been growth in the ranks of those practicing hygiene in their lives, but there are yet only a few thousand devoted hygienists. The revival of natural hygiene in the 1920s owed much of its impetus to the efforts of Bernard McFadden and Dr. Herbert M. Shelton. Though there were some great hygienists in the early part of this century, notably Harewood Carrington, Otto Kark, John H. Tilden, and Linda Burfield Hazard, Dr. Shelton became the acknowledged voice of hygiene with the publication of his immortal book, Human Life, Its Philosophy and Laws, in 1927. Though Dr. Shelton built upon the shoulders of his predecessors, he produced such a wealth of literature with new findings and thoughts that he added more to the science and art of healthful living than any other person. He had the benefit of new findings, and his fertile mind generated a new body of knowledge based on them. Today, the hygienic movement still survives, though it cannot be said that it thrives. A few thousand Americans practice it conscientiously. A greater multitude pay lip service to it and practice healthier living because of it. But by and large, hygiene is almost completely out of the mainstream on the American health scene. In this lesson, we cannot hope to more than summarily deal with hygiene's history. Books on the history of hygiene are practically non-existent. It must be picked up in fragments here and there from books and magazines that make reference to the past. You'll pick up the history of hygiene throughout your studies. Perhaps someday a history will be published.